Rob in Georgia has some questions about heaven. So, hi, Rob.
Hello. I called back, or I called before, and you told me to call back. But I actually am more interested in the time thing now, the idea of God outside of time and space. The original thing I was curious about was if Gnostic atheists often say that the idea of heaven sounds horrifying. I've never really understood that. It seems that the idea of being in such a state with, even if it's not infinite possibilities, innumerable things to focus on without the human discomfort of fear, anxiety, loneliness. If I could take a pill to become immortal and to become pansexual, I would take it immediately, because that would get rid of my biases and my fear of death. So I'm wondering what your view of a Gnostic atheist view of that is.
I'm going to jump in super quick and then get the hell out of the way. Because first of all, I don't know what being pansexual would have to do with that, but cool. For me, the notion, specific versions of heaven sound very hellish to me. Because it takes away the things that make me me. When somebody says there's no sadness in heaven, I can appreciate the fact that a naive understanding of the world would be one where we say, we want a world with no sadness. But that is not a good understanding of what happens and what should happen in a world where there's freedom, and a world where there's choice, and a world where there's love. Because things that make you sad, you can grow from, so that those things don't necessarily make you sad in the same way. But to be told that I would be forced, that I have no freedom to leave, that I have no freedom to make up my own mind, that I'm going to sit here and be servile and praising for all eternity, I don't think I would want to praise for one whole day, let alone the entirety of eternity. And so for some versions of heaven, they sound like hell to me personally. And if you're just going to say, everybody gets their own paradise, cool. Granted, you have no more evidence for that than anything else, but where are you at on heaven, Shannon?
So similarly, I can't imagine that it would be a happy state should I be separated from people I love, for example. So let's say I convert to Christianity today and I get to go to heaven, but my son stays an atheist or becomes an atheist. He's still quite young, so he's not quite sure where he's landing yet. So let's say he lands atheist and I land Christian, and Christianity is true. I go to heaven. When he passes, he doesn't get to be there. So that means that I'm eternally separated from what's essentially the love of my life. How can I be happy that way? And given the way that the infrastructure exists, it sounds as though what you're saying, or what other people say, or the way that it's been proposed to me, is that something will happen to make me happy, which means that something will happen in my mind to make me be happy, even though in my existent state, I know for a fact I could not be happy like that. So it would either have to fundamentally change who I am in order to make me ostensibly happy, or I would have to be unhappy, which is a state that apparently can't exist there. So that's the paradigm that I have an issue with. Does that make sense as an example?
I think so. And, by the way, while I don't consider myself trans, I do use they, them pronouns. So I agreed a lot with what was said before, but yeah.
Sorry, I was yelling. I could have done better there. I could have said things in a different tone.
My apologies, Rob, because this is one of the few shows where call screeners aren't just default asking and putting it in there. We should start.
We should start. Absolutely. Yes, please.
I'll just say that my preference, pass it on to the crew, is that we just start asking so the pronouns exist there. And anybody who doesn't want to answer doesn't have to answer.
Sounds good.
Cosign.
Okay. And
Rob.
Can I mention what you told me to call about last time I called? You told me to call back and let you know how certain things went.
Sure, absolutely. Give us an update.
Okay. Last time I used an abbreviation of one of my given names, which wasn't a good idea. So this time I went with Rob. But I'm the person who called about trying to describe the idea of the Trinity as like Piccolo from DBZ dividing himself into multiple forms. But when they come back together, he has all the memories. And I just viewed El as the one that was constantly aware, Yeshua as a lessered form for our sake, and the Holy Spirit as a way we describe what God does, but isn't actually separate. As far as the non-religious stuff, I've been dealing with homelessness, which is now resolved. I've been renting a basement that was converted into a duplex for more than a year, so I think I'm housing stable. The depression and other things regarding my sexuality have actually gotten worse, but being in a stable place hopefully will help with that in the future. But as far as the time and space thing, for the sake of the show, I think if we think about it sincerely, what people mean when they say outside of time and space is that El sees, or God sees, all of the time of this universe almost like a structure that can be affected, and that they exist outside of space in the sense of outside of our space. But I think if God does anything, time's needed for that, and if God is, space is needed for that.
I like the fact that you went to a fictional fantasy creation to try to come up with a justification for something else that appears to be a fictional fantasy creation. Like, it's not like anybody has any evidence that there is a God or that God is outside of time and space. And yet you seem to be really focused on trying to come up with a way where that makes sense, rather than doing the work that needs to take place first, which is this actually true? Because if it's not true, then every second you've spent trying to make it make sense was wasted.
There's a strong argument there, and I think I would very much prefer the comparative comfort of being a Gnostic atheist. I desire that. I think I've listened to most all of Aaron Ra's stuff, and I can, as good of an evangelical as I used to be, I think I'm equally good at converting people away from religious ideas that scare me now. But I seem to be unable to actually not be theistic. I have that sense of a presence. I have a sense of awareness of something hearing what I say. If I blaspheme in certain ways that I'm not confident aren't true, El, Allah, Yahweh, Jehovah, Elohim, those descriptions in the Bible are nonsensical. I can say that, but I
and yet you stick with the labels.
I seem to be theistic in that I do believe and have no choice to believe. It's like free will. Of course I have free will. I have no choice but to have free will. I don't know if becoming a Gnostic atheist would help me with
I don't know what, Rob,
anxiety or depression, but yeah.
Rob, I don't. So first of all, you get rid of El and Yahweh and everything else, but you keep using the labels. You also talked about doing a pretty good job of leading people away from ideas and that scare you. But I'm not here as a skeptic. Skepticism isn't let's do something about those ideas that scare us. It's about whether or not something is true and believable. And so there are plenty of scary things that are true. Cancer's really fucking scary, and yet it's true. And so it seems like you're doing better. I wish you would get away from the wrong questions, which is this scary? Is it problematic? How does this make sense of a God outside of space-time? And get to the questions that truly matter, which is any of this true? Because, and it doesn't, you don't need to be a Gnostic atheist or an atheist of any stripe at all. You seem to be putting up this, I'm either a theist, but a fuzzy one, and I don't know what else, or I'm a Gnostic atheist, and that would be most comfortable for me. And I wish that I was Gnostic atheist and pansexual. And it's not an all or nothing thing. This is not a zero-sum game. You can just say, I don't have good reasons to believe these things, and therefore I'm not going to believe them until somebody demonstrates a good reason. And that can be for every single aspect of it, no matter what label you're putting on it. And no matter whether you think you're comfortable with being a Gnostic atheist or not.
May I ask them a question?
So replacing false with unknown. Sure.
Rob, may I ask you a question? Are you currently certain that it's true there's a God of some sort, or are you currently comforted somehow by the thought that there's a God of some sort?
It's a little bit harder than that. It's more like if I start to try to express certain things, it's almost like the feeling of like a parental figure's fingers on the back of my shoulder. And again, that sense of someone with me, a present, someone hearing or responding with emotional sensations, making me feel things, that type of thing.
So do you think that that could potentially be a form of mental programming or indoctrination that has caused you to have that mental scaffolding? Do you derive a benefit from the belief? Because it sounds to me like you're consistently calling in and that aspects of yourself are butting up against this belief. So are you currently deriving something positive from this belief, or is this belief a source of strife that you're looking to overcome?
Well, it seems this is the second time I've called, and I don't think I've seen an episode between the two calls, so maybe that's a failing on my part. But as far as whether or not it's useful, I don't know. My sexuality is such that when I was religious, I thought God was calling me to the ministry and giving me something socially inappropriate so that I could empathize with the struggles of other people. And I desire to have the comfort of being a religious leader, of being a guide. I am, as much as I desire the comfort of confident disbelief, I also have a great longing for going back to a church and being religious and having that a community.
Right. So you long for a sense of community, and you were raised in a structure where you were essentially taught that your sexuality or your sexual orientation was something that was problematic, and you perceived it as being a challenge that was given to you so that you could be more relatable to people who you would be preaching to. Am I understanding that correctly? That's how you read that life experience?
Well, I guess since I'm not using my name, I might as well say that I'm not attracted to people my age, and I haven't been since high school, and that's been devastating and scary. And
like you're attracted to older people?
No,
Please say
I'm
older
not,
people,
and
Rob.
that's why it's so scary.
You need to seek help for that.
To people my age.
Yeah. You need to seek some help,
but
Rob.
It's not something. Yeah, I understand, but it's not related to the religious stuff, and it's just a line on the spectrum, the age range I happen to be attracted to. But it's always been true since high school, so that's why I was avoiding mentioning it, because even among non-believers, it has a very powerful negative emotional response.
As it should.
You can understand that, though. That's an appropriate response. The negative emotional response is an appropriate response to that, though. You understand that, though, right, Rob?
Yes, I understand. And I also understand that counseling would be helping me live with it, not curing me of it, because it's not something that I can change. But
Rob,
that's why I avoid talking about it, because...
So, Rob, I'm gonna jump in here because we're running short on time. First of all, I'd recommend that you perhaps consider calling secular sexuality. But more so than calling a show, you need to get treatment. I've been on a campaign for many years to correct people about misunderstandings about pedophilia and the difference between pederasty. There may be people who have an attraction that they have no choice over, and they never act upon that, and that this is good that they never act on this. But it requires some help, and it doesn't mean that we just sit here and go, well, there's nothing that can be done about that, so I guess it's not a big deal. You're going to need to get the help, the best help you can, to make sure that you don't ever find yourself in a position where you do something that hurts another human being. I'm going to stop now because there's a couple other calls to get to, and this part of the conversation isn't relevant to your God belief or anything else. But yes, the Psychotherapy Project, secular sexuality, and just finding a good therapist that can deal with this are going to go a long way towards making sure that you don't find yourself becoming the example that makes this a mess for everybody.
A quick response before the call-ins. As far as the way people react to that, at least from the research I've seen, it's less likely than on average. There's no association as far as negative or violent actions, but I was meaning to talk about religion, and I
Rob?
wish I hadn't corrected that misconception on her part, because then we'd be talking about religion, but I understand the call needs to end.
Yeah, and I'm not the slightest bit impressed with your attempt to smooth things over. Because, I haven't seen a good correlation between that and violence. It is fucking violence. That's the point, Rob. Stop. You need.
No, you misunderstand.
No,
I wasn't talking
I'm
about.
done talking to you about this, Rob. That's what I understand. Have a good day. I'm done, Rob. Do we understand that?
Yeah.
Get some help.
Yes, I just wasn't talking about that.
Rob, never mind. Goodbye. 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 If your defense to something is to say, well, I read some stuff, there's not the strong connection between this and violence, you've misunderstood, and you are engaged in a process of rationalizing. I like other people would like for Rob and everyone else with an attraction that can be dangerous to get help and avoid ever taking action that might hurt another person. I'm not talking about you're a bad person or it's your fault or anything remotely like that. But if you're still in the mode where you're trying to find a way to soften it so that it doesn't feel as much of a problem as it is, you're not getting help. And I'm not going to be the person who advocates alongside for that.